bienvenidos sean todos ustedes. Yes, I'm speaking in Spanish, but the rest of the show is going to be in English. Welcome to this sort of experiment that we have with the Palomazos. In English, it should be something like jam sessions, where we have special guests. And as you all in the audience have been noticing, we have been focused in more specific topics. In this case, we are going to continue with the trend talking about science fiction, but more focused on storytelling. And for this, we have two colleagues of such lethal cunning that are joining me in here. First, all the way across from the other side to the wall, we have Tom Merrit. Tom, how are you doing?
I'm doing well, Dan. Thank you.
It's a real pleasure to have you here with us. And well, Tom is here. We're going to talk about some books, and of course, one of the books that we're going to be talking about. It's actually been written by him. And also, we have the other colleague of such lethal cunning. I always wanted to use that. Is Blanca Nuclear Wolf 79 in Twitter. How are you doing, Blanca?
Quite fine, Dan. Thanks for the invitation.
Thank you guys for joining me in this transmission. So as I mentioned before, previous to the transmission, well, we're in Facebook, we're in Periscope, we're in YouTube. So please follow us in there, and also keep an eye on the transmission because we will be giving away some copies of one book, but we're going to mention that at the end of the show. So the reason that we are in here is to talk about the use of tech, the use of science as an element that drives the narrative, that drives the storytelling on certain stories. Some of the stories that we're going to mention actually have been translated to films. So the first example is about The Martian. It's a movie that the book was written by Andy Weir. It was adapted by Ridley Scott before the Alien Covenant movie, which is his latest. And one of the things that I found very interesting about this book is that it changed the genre, because the book, if I'm not mistaken, it's a little bit more about hard science with the elements that it mentioned. But after that, in the movie, we have something more focused in adventure. At least it was in my experience. For example, in your case, Tom, well, you obviously read the book, have already read the book, but what was your impression when you first got the chance to read The Martian?
I loved it from the beginning. I loved the fact that it included science but didn't let science get in the way of a good story. I think Andy Weir did something amazing there in not compromising on the science as much as some authors would, but at the same time keeping very close to what would have to happen. And I also, in the film, I thought it was interesting how they made a choice to change the chronology in which the story is told. And I don't want to say too much in case someone hasn't read it, but you get a different unfolding of the story. And at first I was worried that could really undermine the revelations, but I don't think it did. And the fact that I'd read the book undermined the whole story, right? I knew what was going to happen, and I still really enjoyed the movie.
Which is one of the most important things, because in some cases, actually, we have seen that in TV shows. Perhaps American Gods, I have it fresh in my memory, but it actually changed some of the elements from the book, changed the order. So it was something interesting that they actually translate to a different language. After all, the audiovisual language, it has to have a different kind of pace, I guess. So, Blanca, you have the chance of watching the film of The Martian and also reading the novel, or did you only watch the film?
I read the novel and also watched the movie, and I find both to be very two complete different products. The novel at the beginning, I think it has a very particular narrative rate, since the way it's all the facts that when the plot points are being exposed are driving you to as a reader to get attached, to get involved with the character. I think despite the fact that it has a lot of hard science fiction, it's more about human conflict, a man against, in this case, some kind of another planet, but it's man against nature. And he only has his knowledge and his human capabilities to face the fact that he is some kind of náufrago, se me fue la
Mhm.
palabra, so, like a sailor who has lost his boat.
Castaway.
So I think the core conflict is about a man who's trying to get to go back home. It's very human. It's very um, I think it's very effective, and the movie it was actually a surprise for me because there's been a while since something nice to watch or nice to hear about. So I think it was a pretty good adaptation. However, I think there are some details that, uh, well, it's good not to show on the screen because they are more like appealing for a diegetic world uh, being built as a result of a description, a literary description. No.
And for example,
Uh,
one question that I have for both of you, I don't know if you got the chance to watch before the movie any of the special segments that Ridley Scott actually recorded that weren't part of the movie but that gave a little bit of the insight about the characters. Tom, did you by any chance have the chance of watching any of those segments?
Yeah, I watched a few of them. I'm not sure if I actually caught all of them before I saw the movie, but I did end up going back and seeing all of them eventually. And before the movie came out, what I enjoyed about them is it felt like extra book content as well,
Mm-hmm.
because these
mhm,
were scenes that were referred to in the book as things that had happened, but you didn't actually get to see them
mhm.
happen or live with them. And so it was a fun bit of extra content from both directions.
Exactly. And for example, Blanca, I don't know if you remember some of those because I believe that Ridley Scott has been a really interesting character in adaptation. On an adaptation level of the different kind of storytelling because for Prometheus he did the same. Perhaps it wasn't as successful, or perhaps he was a little bit more ambitious, but he actually added a lot of segments that when you went to watch the movie, in this case Prometheus, you actually didn't get the feeling. For example, one of the main characters, it was young in the previews, but when you get to meet him in the movie, Mr. Wayland, he was really old, so you were like, what the hell is going on in here? So I believe that in The Martian, it actually was to better use in that case. But for example, sorry, I'm just mixing my words. It was
Don't worry.
better used in that example. But for example, and finally with you, Blanca, do you think any of the scientific elements that were left out of the adaptation were actually missing in the final movie?
No, I don't think so. I think Ridley Scott as a storyteller he's a good actor director. However, he sometimes has some problems when it comes to storytelling. I was thinking about, uh, for instance, in Blade Runner, which is also an adaptation from a classic sci-fi novel from Philip K. Dick. Well, it's very visual, and I think it conveys the emotion through characters. And I think he achieved that in the Martian as well. However, in uh, Prometheus or even in Covenant, he lacks a lot of character work and characterization, and also uh, he has some trouble building the core conflict. No, however, in The Martian, I think it is a very good adaptation, and as a storyteller, he achieves, I think, in a good way, uh, how the conflict is exposed, how the character is built, and how the characterization is achieved through uh, not only the way he thinks, because that's described inside the movie, the novel, but also the way he acts. I think the thing Scott did with the character in The Martian is a very fine work. I don't find it excelling. However, I think it's very sensitive.
Mm-hmm. And one just last one mention. If you want to know a little bit more about this book, please you just have to Google Sword and Laser podcast, and the community that you have in there with Veronica Belmont, Tom, is beautiful. It started, if I'm not mistaken, in Goodreads, but obviously, well, I get to know that in the podcast format, and I always recommend. Actually, Blanca can be. Can testify that because in one of the shows of Rory's Cows, I mentioned some of the references that I got from the community from Goodreads. So this takes us to the next book, which actually was named has a change of name when it was adapted to a movie, which is Arrival. Perhaps you have known it better in that way. But Blanca, do you remember what is the name of the original story? Because it wasn't actually a novel.
The Story of Your Life.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's the name. It's a short novel about 40 pages or something like that, but it's simply awesome. The way the author uses the language to talk about language, I think that metalinguistic expression is something very rich and very well achieved in the text. However, when I went to see the movie, I haven't read the novel before, and I found out that the movie was awesome. I found that very impressive, even though they change a lot of small details in the storyline. For instance, this is going to be a spoiler. I'm sorry. In the movie, the girl that who dies. I don't remember how she what's the name of the character, the one who's telling the story. Her daughter dies because of cancer. There's nothing a mother can do about it. The girl has cancer. That's it. Fate, you call it whatever. However, I think that detail goes goes farther when in the novel. The thing is, the girl has an accident that can be prevented by the mother. However, she chooses not to interfere with the way the future is being built. I think it's a story about language as an invisible technology, the time and the way language builds thought, but also it's a story about choice, about knowing what's going to happen and still sticking to what you think in that moment should make more sense. And in that sense, I find the Story of Your Life, the same as the film Arrival, to be very complex narrative proposals.
And for example, Tom, I know that in your experience, it actually went the other way. You first read the story and then you watch the movie. Did it change in your perspective the main plot, the main meaning of the story, or how was your experience?
I think that's one of the great achievements of the film, is that the main meaning of the story is largely still delivered, despite the fact that it has to be told in an entirely different manner. When I was reading The Story of Your Life and I found out that they were making a movie, I was very skeptical that they could do that, because one of the main problems in doing a movie of a book is you can't be in someone's head like you can in a written novel. You can't in a novel, you can tell someone what someone is thinking, or even not even just tell them, but have you experience what they're experiencing. And in a movie, you can't do that. You have to show what is happening. And The Story of Your Life is almost entirely an experience in one woman's head. And so I was like, I don't know how you film that. And The Arrival is how you film that. What they changed were exactly the things that had to be changed, and the way they told the story was changed to say these are the important elements of the story we need to convey, but we're not going to follow the book to get to them. We're going to entirely adapt based on the medium we're using to tell the story. And I found that incredibly impressive.
Yeah, and actually, I believe that that's one of the things that made it more relevant because it's actually a work of adaptation where you preserve
Hmm.
the main idea, the main concept. However, you use the what is in the new media yeah, and use it in your favor. Because, for example, I remember actually the one of the things that struck me the most was the use of tenses because that in the book it's kind of like a joker card because it can help you in the way that you're reading. For example, the main character is the Dr. Louis Banks, and for example
Hmm.
the use of tenses can be a little bit tricky, but for example how can you translate it actually to the movie? And for example, Blanca, do you believe that actually well, actually, what are the sciences that are being used in the story and in the film that actually makes the story qualify as science fiction? Or I'm seeing something that is not in there.
Linguistics. Uh, it's hard to believe that uh, all the human sciences, things about social sciences are also science. So yes, they are using this humanistic approach to to engage with a conflict that it's about invisible technologies, something as complex, but at the same time, a very common thing that is language. Without language, there wouldn't even be a human race. Uh, Something that they show in the movie that wasn't in the book, and I love that part, is when Dr. Lewis tells the other doctor that he's a physicist. No? He says, "Oh, hard sciences such as physics and chemistry are uh, the base, the main foundation of human knowledge." You know, and she says, "No, that they aren't. It's language." And I totally agree. Language is what makes us human. However, that kind of technology is many times it's taken for granted. No, so I I find very interesting and very daring that an author work in the sci-fi genre uh, goes into the soft sciences, the human sciences, and say, well, this is a conflict about this particular kind of human technology, and we have a lot of conflicts around that. Even the way we conceive time and space, for instance, I find that fascinating in both the novel and the film.
And for example, from there, and actually we are receiving some questions of the audience. Tom, do you have any kind of conflict if you first have read the novel and then watch the movie, or for you is the same? After all, they are different media.
I don't think in particular in this case that it matters. I know I have friends who say you should always watch the movie first because the book will only give you more. I've always been of the belief that I'd rather read the book first so that I cement my impression of things in my own head before the visuals are put in front of me by someone else. But I think with the story of your life, I don't think you can do it wrong because the stories are coming at you from such different perspectives. You're going to get spoiled if you watch one of them or read one of them first anyway, and you're still going to get an entirely different viewpoint of it. And I think so. Yeah, I don't think it's a problem. I don't think one of them is privileged over the other.
And well, we started to mention, for example, something really commercial, at least in the filmmaking with the Martian. From there, we went to something a little bit more specialized. We're no longer to talk about movies, but we will be keeping the conversation about novels. And now, Tom, I need you to bring us back to the hard science in the case of the three body problem. What is this novel about?
Yeah, The Three Body Problem is a book by Cixin Liu. He is a Chinese author who first serialized the story in science fiction world in 2006. It was published in China in 2008. It won the Chinese Science Fiction Galaxy Award in 2006. And then it was translated by Ken Liu in 2014 and published in English. And went on to win the 2015 Hugo Award for Best Novel, as well as getting a Nebula Award nomination. So that tells you its credits. It doesn't tell you what the story is about, but it is a Chinese science fiction story, and it is still accessible entirely to anyone from any experience. Although, when you start the novel, it's going to be taking place in the past, and it's going to feel very much like a historical novel, because a lot of what happens during the Great Leap Forward in China, which had a lot of very anti-intellectual movements in it. And there are scientists caught up in that, trying to figure out how to survive. One of the main characters' father is killed for having incorrect
Which
thoughts,
had a lot of
according to the regime of the day. And then it moves into the present day, and certain discoveries are happening in these old projects that were started back during the 1960s. And not to spoil the plot, but you start to realize that some of these transmissions are coming from outside of Earth, and there is a union of China, Russia, the United States military trying to figure out what is happening, because it's causing scientists to kill themselves after they learn a piece of very dangerous information. And so it's funny that you've picked The Martian and Arrival both, because there are elements of space travel involved in this, but there are also a lot of elements of language and understanding and conceptual difference between an alien race and humanity, and what our minds can actually comprehend without losing all hope, or losing all ability to see why we should still exist. And it's both a tragic but also a challenging story that goes from historical fiction all the way through science fiction and into possibly a protopian sort of indication at the end of the first book.
And for example, one of the things that I found most interesting about the novel, and I believe that it actually comes from the very beginning, is the way that the contact is being established. And for example, Blanca, one of the topics that you are an eminence is actually video games. And for example, I don't know, have you had the chance to read the Three-Body Problem?
Only the first book.
Only the first book. And for example, what do you think about the way that they use actually video games to get into the culture?
I think it's pretty pertinent. However, I think it's a very provocative novel. To tell you the truth, I'd like to see an adaptation, not to film, but to a video game. Even though they are using the games, how would it feel to be one of these scientists being chased during some period of time? You are desperately looking for an answer, because we are humans and we want to know everything. We want knowledge. However, we lack the wisdom to do something with that knowledge we are getting. So how would it feel to be one of those characters, all those choices, and how do we face that human conflict about there are things you are not going to be able to know? Well, I like to know them. Oh, crap. Now, well, do I kill myself? Do that kill myself? Kills me. I think the conflict is very, very thrilling and very provocative. So, I even though they use a lot of gaming aspects to move the plot, I would like to see a video game made out of that book.
And
Definitely.
And for example, actually, one of the things the video game actually didn't pass to my mind, but actually that you mention it right now, it's like something that you will want to see, but because it would be interesting how they mix it. But they actually did something really interesting in the novel, and you mentioned it before, Tom, the way that it actually moves from historical novel to science fiction. And I remember that one of the things that just blew my mind, and is when they start talking about the sophons, I believe that's the way that you pronounce it, and how a computer or an artificial intelligence, I don't know how exactly how to call it, can it blend itself so it can move faster. When I remember when they started with the description of that, I was like, whoa, let me read that back again. uh, what other kind of scientific concepts that were shown in there, Tom, did you find interesting in the three body problem?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I love on a softer side, I love the interdisciplinary take where the characters, none of them are the scientist who knows everything. They are scientists within their discipline, and they are very clearly do not know things about other disciplines, and even get criticized or make mistakes. And I'm like, oh, finally, like something that reflects reality, where, not just because you're a physicist doesn't mean you even know every aspect of every discipline of physics. And so I really liked that reality. And then the name, the three body problem, refers to an exercise of physics and is
Mm-hmm.
the main plot of the video game that we're referring to. And I really liked that I got a better understanding of the three body problem. I had heard of it and read about it before, but the book really helped it sink in to understand what that was. I'm not sure that I can explain it back to you now, but I have a better instinct for understanding it. And I would like to play the video game too, like Blanca says, because I would like to try to solve that three body problem, even though I know from the book it's probably entirely unsolvable.
Yeah, and you always will be wondering, well, perhaps it was a bad play because it was a chaotic era instead of a stable era. So it will be always that kind of difficulty level on an aleatory mode that will be really, really hard to grab. For example, we're going to pass now to I like to say like the main story, but actually it's to talk more about science fiction now in a little bit more kind way, more easier for the reader. And actually that's the main reason why we have you in here, Tom. And once again, thanks for sharing your knowledge and your time with us. And Pilotex, tell us about your novel Pilotex, which actually was released, I believe, like 3 months ago, 2 months ago, well, very recently. So who is Pilotex and what's the deal with him?
Pilot X is a character who comes from a race called the Elendans, who consider themselves the guardians of time and space because they have mastered time travel. They're the only race in this universe that can go forward and backward in time. And that's one thing to note. There are no humans in this book. They're all other races, although the Elendans are bipeds, so they're very similar to humans. And Pilot X just wants to fly a time ship. The story it begins for him with trying to get his license and pass his test, and that's all he wants to do. But he gets caught up into these manipulations and these plots, and he does well in them and finds himself in the end facing a decision where he can either stop a war between these three alien races, including his own, uh, but at the cost of eliminating all three races, including his own. And he has to make that horrible decision to save the universe from itself by eliminating his own people.
Yeah, and for example, I remember that some of the races that you actually have mentioned, and something that I will like to discuss a little bit further. But for example, first we go with you, Blanca, about how do you feel about the presentation of alien races, for example, in fiction in general? And I ask this because I love the focus that Tom made between I could say the main antagonist races that you have, the Progons, which are pretty much just a calculating machine, and the Sensorians, I hope I am pronouncing this right, which are
Spot
like,
on.
oh, thanks, which are more like our organic hive mind, which actually will be like, I don't know, like a machine computer versus a biological computer. So how do you see the presentation of different races in fiction and also in this book, Blanca?
I guess in science fiction, the conflict between what's organic and what can be mechanic, it's a very complex subject that, for instance, I've seen it a lot in video games, for instance, in StarCraft, when either you're playing with Protoss or we are playing with Zergs, but you have objectives that are very close. You need resources, you need space, and I guess that's the way every war is moving. Even if it's an alien species, it's another human being. I guess the core subject about warfare and the war conflict, it's about different views of the same or the different views of the universe, for instance. And the thing about aliens that I can find very appealing is the way, um, even though they are presented as aliens, deep inside they are quite human. They are so humane that, for instance, this thing about having organic aliens that are usually more um, driven. Well, that's human. But there's also this thing about mechanic beings that we've seen also in um, Japanese kaiju films, for instance. We have there the thing about logical knowledge, no? So I guess it's also a human conflict, no? This the way of thinking the human is as a dual entity for reason for in one side, instinct in another, or passion in another, uh, being that, well, I guess we are actually both. However, these conflicting parts have brought us to uh, face many conflicts, not only uh, socially speaking, but also economically speaking. Um, Things about education, philosophy, ideology, the way we are looking at the world and at our human lives, our human existence as separated beings. I don't know, maybe that's uh, some kind of conflict that has been inside the narrative systems, even from classic theater, no? So I guess it was um, almost um desirable that science fiction have to deal with that kind of dichotomy, and also yes, influence cinematography. For instance, I was thinking about this film Enemy of Mine, or even things as commercial films, just as E.T., where you're saying that thing that is out there, that is unknown, that it doesn't even talk like you, it doesn't even have your language. It's there's something about it that is very close to you. You're there. You are also an alien for someone, no? And I guess that's one of the main uh, conflicts, not only science fiction, but also the fantasy genre has been dealing with the last decades,
And for example, now that you mentioned that, and I will go with you now, Tom. One of the things that I like the most is the fact that actually the characters are very relatable. And I remember that one of the things that I found really funny at the beginning is when the pilot X has to fight bureaucracy for some of the things that he has to do at the beginning, and it was like, okay, you have to get into this line to do well to follow through something of the procedures that you have to do. So I was like, yes, it's just like us. Perhaps it's in a fictional universe, but I can relate to that. So actually, that helps you to get with the characters and get with this story. But for example, I would like you to mention about, a little bit more about how you establish the timeline, because it's something that I found fascinating. Because it was very well crafted. It was something that, well, you obviously had the story in your mind. I believe that you started working in that on an NaNoWriMo a couple of years ago or something like that. But for example, when you get to the end of the story, all the elements are in there. So obviously you had the time to revise them as you went along with the editing process. But tell us more about how you establish the timeline, because we have some change of personalities. Well, actually more like change of positions for the pilot X, who becomes a different character, and so on. So please tell us more about that.
Yeah, sure. The main idea I wanted in the time travel story was to not do the thing that some stories do that always bugs me. It doesn't ruin stories, but it bugs me when you can go back in time and change things, and the time that you started in is somehow privileged, right? That you can, that you forget that, hey, there's no particular point in time that is the base point in time. If you go back in time, what you're doing back there already happened before you went back and did it. And so I stuck with that. I was saying, without expending vast amounts of energy to change physics, you can't change things when you go back in time. So everything you do either has to be hidden or unknown, because there's so many places you can go in a vast universe that not everybody can know everything. Or you know that it had an effect. And that was my guiding principle. So I plotted out Pilot X's story. I knew where I wanted him to go, and then I moved him around in time and had to keep in my mind, okay, if he's going back there, then maybe this person hasn't been there anymore. And I
Mhm.
didn't spend too much time plotting out the timelines of the other characters, but I just, kind of a magic trick. I used a couple of them as examples to show, hey, they could be meeting out of order. So there's one particular scene where he meets with his boss, an ambassador, and he has a meeting when the ambassador has already had the next meeting. And then when he goes and has the next meeting, the ambassador hasn't had that meeting yet. And it's all out of order. But I wanted to show, like, that sort of thing can happen. And just because you can't change the past doesn't mean there aren't still mysteries and things that people can't know.
Yeah, and for example, I remember those were some of the nice surprises that you have when you read the book. Because, for example, you know that let's say that it's established in a world where the everything is established and the time you cannot change the events. However, as you mentioned, there are still some surprises in there. And for example, we have the other, let's say, the other tendency that is like, well, time is always in flux, so you can change pretty much everything. However, one of the things that I love it about this is that the races that you introduce, the ones that are in conflict, they are like, well, this is regular. Perhaps this race, well, I know that this race, they already know how everything in the world and in the time flux everything goes. For me, it's normal. It's like traveling through space, but just in time. So
Yeah.
for me, that was really refreshing. So it was like, whoa, it can be simpler to do it like that. And for example, with Blanca, we're going with you. What other stories, science fiction stories about time travel, have you read, have you watched, or have you have contact in a different medium, video games, etc., that actually have a cool understanding of well, we're guessing of time travel? And I say that we're guessing because we're just traveling forward in time. I don't know.
I was thinking about this novel, Richard Matheson's A Place in Time.
Mm-hmm.
The thing about this character that falls asleep, and for some reason he wakes up in the past, and he falls in love with a woman, and then he comes back to the present and keeps looking for her. I find that very human, and almost depressive also, because he cannot change the past. I think the science fiction uh, focus, many authors focus sometimes too much in about what about the past you would change, and not so much in what of the past can you learn and assume. And I think that's a great flaw of many narratives. However, there has been a lot of interesting productions, even funny. I am a big fan, for instance, a big fan of very, very, very entertaining. But also, I was thinking about Donnie Darko, for
Mm-hmm.
instance. Well, it's working about not the past but the future as something that is already determined, and you cannot change anything. Only what very little things, and still you can get surprised about how things are going to be worked out by the script. However, I think is uh, working with the subject of time is a very provocative thing, because I think is uh, every reader's temptation to see how you can influence change the past, in order not to change the past, but to change our present and have a better future. I think that's also very neurotic. However, it's the way most authors have worked time through. Well, in science fiction, and I think it's very, very, very interesting the way you, Tom, are uh, proposing this hypothesis in which you cannot change anything. You can only learn, and I think that's even though science fiction, that that's more real. You cannot change the past. You can change the way that you think about the past, but the things that happened, well, you cannot do anything about that. No. And I was going to ask you. There's another book of yours. I'm sorry, but I like it very much. Boiling Point.
Hmm.
Not because it deals with time, but because it's a novel written, well, published 20 years ago. And I think, well, you didn't change the past, but surely there are a lot of things you were able to see about the future. And I wanted to ask if you think science fiction from the 90s can give us some uh, insight about how we can get to understand what's happening to the world today.
Yeah, I think that a lot of books from a lot of eras can do that. Science fiction is great for imagining what could happen if certain things stayed true. And I think it's interesting with Boiling Point, that was one of the first things I ever wrote, and it was about the breakup of the United States into separate countries. And I remember like around 2002, 2003, I started to think, well, this is feeling really dated now. It doesn't feel like this is this was written in the Clinton era and it shows. And it's funny that you say, because I feel like lately a lot of those things have been coming back into feeling like they are more relevant again than they used to be. So I guess because history goes in cycles like that, you can always go back and find something from a similar period of history and look at science fiction and say, okay, what were they worried about? What were they predicting? And what could we learn from that? I think it's science fiction from the 1970s also has a lot to say, especially the early 70s, that is still relevant to the time we're in now.
And for example, that actually gives the well, I had one final question, Tom. And for example, what other influences did you have? What other sources of inspiration have you had? Particularly for the case of Pilotex. And I ask this because, for example, after finishing the reading, I was wondering that, well, I know that you also like reading comic books. And for example, I was like, well, actually, the kind of grasp that you have about the characters and the universal context made me wish that you at any time could write a story about the Green Lanterns, because it was pretty much some of the elements could fit in there. And I was like, yes, you have the Guardians here, you have the renegade Hal Jordan in the case of the pilot. Perhaps not as Hal Jordan, but I saw some reference. So if you could mention some of the influences that you have for this story in particular.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, in general, I'm a big fan of the Philip K. Dick works. I like almost everything that he's ever written, and I think that informs everything that I write. But particularly Pilot X, I wrote because the 50th anniversary episode of Doctor Who was promoted to tell the story of how the Ninth Doctor faced this moment where he had to defeat the Daleks and banish his race, the Gallifreyans. And the way they told that story was different than I expected. And that's not to say that it was bad. I actually very much enjoyed the story they told in the 50th anniversary, but I was still hung up in my head of what I had thought was going to happen. And so I said, okay, well, what is it about that expectation that was interesting to you? And it was the fact that you had a good person making an impossible choice. And so that's where I decided to write Pilot X. I'm like, all right, I'm going to have a time traveler face a situation that is an impossible choice. And so the work for me was to create a world that wasn't a ripoff of Doctor Who, to create something that it certainly has similarities, but was my own world with my own systems. And so we don't have Pilot X meeting humans and traveling with a companion, and I distanced itself, but that central element of a good person facing an impossible choice was what I wanted to get to.
Nice. Well, unfortunately we are reaching pretty much the end of this transmission. However, it would be great if we all three could get together in the future to have a different transmission, because, for example, I know that there are some common topics that perhaps we would gladly talk about. I don't know, the man in the White Castle. I know that Blanca is a huge fan of that series. Antonio, desde luego, and obviously you, Tom, and well, I actually enjoy a lot that both the novel and actually the adaptation. But well, that's for different things. However, in your case, Blanca, if they want to hear a little bit more about perhaps not science, but it certainly will have some fiction, where can they get more information in audio format in this case?
For instance, in our podcast Honoris Causa, however, not this season, mainly the first Honoris Causa season for the Universidad Metropolitana. There we have the podcasts are already in iTunes U, and there are several shows about science fiction and horror also.
Mm-hmm. There you are. So please, it's on Wednesday, and I believe it's on 11 p.m., right? Central Time?
11 p.m.
So there you can get more. Obviously, you're seeing some parts of some pictures of the parts involved. Perhaps in the future you will see something that you shouldn't see in there that it's actually talking right now. But well, okay, let's forget about that. And Tom, actually, if they want to get more about about your books, they can do it pretty easily. So where should they go?
TomMerrittBooks.com is the website that collects all my books, including Boiling Point, all together in one place. So I've written 6 or 7, mostly science fiction novels. There's a couple of tech history books in there as well.
There you are. You can find it in there, and you will be able to see all the ways that you can actually acquire. And lastly, but not least, I want to mention that we are going to be giving away 2 copies of Pilot X. So it's really easy. The only thing that you have to do is write a comment in the post. Actually, this is the link that we have been promoting since yesterday. It's a Blogspot post with where this show is being shown actually right now. And in the comments, just please tell us how much would you like a copy of the book, and I will get in touch to you to see how we can deliver it, so you actually can read it and enjoy what we have been having here. Tom, Blanca, it was a real pleasure to have you in here, and hopefully we will repeat this experience in the not so far future. Thank you very much.
It was very nice meeting you, Tom. I love your writing.
Oh, thank you.
Sure. Yes, I definitely need to read Pilot X. I haven't get to put my hands on it so far, but I definitely will. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you. It was nice to meet you too, Blanca. It was great talking with you. I'm curious. I got to check out your stuff as well.
Thank you very much.
Well, it looks like we all got the homework, so some stuff that we have to shoot. And for you that you have been watching this transmission, you also have some homework. Remember that you can get a copy of Pilot X. You already know the rules, and go to the comments. See you in the next transmission. Thank you very much to everybody.